The first punch landed square on my jaw. I stumbled back, tasting blood in my mouth, but I didn't hit the ground. The guy who hit me, big, tattooed, with a face like he chewed bricks for breakfast, smirked as if daring me to fight back. The bar was chaos. People yelling, glass shattering, tables overturned. I didn't even know why the fight had started. 1 minute, I was having a drink, and the next, this guy was in my face, claiming I'd looked at him wrong. But as I steadied myself and wiped the blood from my lip, I realized something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I wasn't anything. Just numb. "Come on, man," the guy sneered, waving me forward. "You gonna cry, or you gonna fight?" I didn't cry. I laughed. Because honestly, getting punched in the face was the most alive I'd felt in weeks. It started about a month ago. Kimberly, my wife, had been acting distant, cliché, I know, but it wasn't the kind of thing you could ignore. She wasn't cold or cruel, she was distracted. And when someone who used to light up at the sound of your voice barely looks at you anymore, it doesn't take a genius to figure out something's wrong. But I told myself I was overthinking it. We had 2 kids, busy schedules, and bills piling up. Stress does weird things to people, right? I wasn't about to turn into one of those paranoid husbands who jumps to conclusions. Then came the anniversary dinner. 15 years of marriage, and she forgot. I cooked, set the table, and even bought her favorite wine. She came home late, said she had a work thing, and went straight to bed without so much as a glance at the setup. No apology, no explanation, just a dismissive "I'm tired." It was like a switch flipped. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. So, I started paying attention. Not snooping, just noticing things. The way she smiled at her phone, the extra care she took getting dressed on random days, the odd excuses about being held up after work. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me awake at night. Still, I needed proof. And as much as I hated the idea, I decided to follow her. Last Tuesday, I told her I had a late meeting and would be home around 10. In reality, I parked a block away from her office and waited. Around 7:30, she came out, not alone. The man with her wasn't a co-worker, I was sure of that. They walked together, laughing, shoulders brushing. When they stopped at her car, he leaned in and kissed her. And that's when everything in me went cold. I didn't confront her. Not then. I didn't even drive home. Instead, I ended up here, in this bar, getting punched in the face by a stranger. Because somehow, it hurt less than what I'd seen. I spent the rest of that night in the truck, parked in a lot behind an old gas station. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to see Kimberly. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her with that man. Laughing, leaning in close, kissing him like I didn't exist. The numbness wore off sometime around dawn, replaced by something worse, shame. I felt like an idiot. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been the clueless husband, believing we were just going through a phase while she was sneaking around behind my back? I couldn't go on like this. I needed answers. When I finally pulled into the driveway, it was almost 6 a.m. The house was quiet, Kimberly's car in its usual spot. Inside, I found her asleep in bed, curled up on her side with a peaceful expression that made me sick. I took a long shower, the water scalding against my skin, and tried to think. But all I had were questions. Why? Who was he? How had I missed it? And then the thought hit me like a punch to the gut, was it my fault? Had I done something or not done something that pushed her to this? Was I not enough for her anymore? That idea made my stomach churn, but I couldn't ignore it. By the time she woke up, I was in the kitchen, drinking coffee that tasted like ash in my mouth. Kimberly shuffled in, wearing her robe and a sleepy smile. "Morning," she said, yawning. "You're up early." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, completely at ease. I studied her, looking for something. Guilt. Regret. Anything that might give her away. But there was nothing. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah," I said quickly. Too quickly. She frowned but didn't press. "Well, I'm meeting Michelle for brunch in an hour. Want me to bring you something back?" Michelle. I hadn't even thought of her yet, but now it all clicked into place. Michelle was always the instigator, the troublemaker. And Kimberly had been spending more time with her lately. Was she covering for Kimberly? Or worse, was she the one who encouraged this? "No, I'm good," I said, forcing a smile. She left a little after 9, and I wasted no time. I'd never gone through her things before. It felt wrong, even now, but I couldn't let that stop me. I started with her laptop, but it was password protected. Her phone was next, but she took it with her everywhere. That left her purse. I dug through it, feeling like a thief in my own home. Makeup, receipts, gum wrappers, nothing unusual. Then, at the bottom, I found something that made my blood run cold. A key. Not one I recognized, and certainly not for anything in our house. It was small, with no label or tag to identify it. My first thought was that it was for a car, but Kimberly only had one, and it wasn't new. I sat there staring at it, my mind racing. Was it for a hotel room? A safe deposit box? An office I didn't know about? By the time Kimberly came home, I'd put everything back exactly as I'd found it. She breezed in with a shopping bag and a smile, acting like nothing was wrong. "Michelle says hi," she said, dropping the bag on the counter. I nodded, barely hearing her. The key was burning a hole in my pocket. The next day, I called in sick to work and waited until Kimberly left for an afternoon yoga class. As soon as she was gone, I drove to the address on the latest receipt I'd found in her purse. It was for a cafe downtown, dated 3 days ago. The cafe was small, with mismatched furniture and overpriced coffee. I ordered something just to blend in and sat near the window, pretending to read a book. An hour passed. Then another. I was about to leave when the door opened, and he walked in. The man from the other night. He didn't notice me, but I noticed him. The way he glanced around, almost nervously. The way he checked his phone, then pocketed it quickly. And then Kimberly walked in. She went straight to him, and they sat in a corner booth, talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The way she looked at him said it all. I stayed long enough to watch them leave together, walking down the street side by side. Then I followed them. They went to a nondescript building a few blocks away. He unlocked the door, and they disappeared inside. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. I wanted to go in after them, to demand answers, to make them see the pain they were causing me. But I didn't. Instead, I went home and started looking for a locksmith. That key in her purse? I was going to find out what it opened. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I didn't sleep much, and I couldn't eat. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, none of them good. The key from Kimberly's purse was my only lead, and if it didn't pan out, I didn't know what I'd do. On Wednesday afternoon, I finally got the call from the locksmith. He'd identified the type of key and the locks it could work with. Based on the design and manufacturer, it was for a small storage unit or private lockbox. He even narrowed it down to a few storage facilities in the area that used that brand. That night, after Kimberly went to bed, I checked her phone. She had no idea I'd mirrored her notifications months ago, so I could still see texts and emails even after she deleted them. A few weeks ago, she'd received a confirmation email from Safe Space Storage about a unit rental. The address matched one of the places the locksmith had mentioned. The next morning, I told her I had an early meeting. Instead, I drove straight to the storage facility. It was a low-key place on the edge of town, the kind of spot you'd barely notice unless you were looking for it. The manager didn't even glance at me when I walked in, just slid a clipboard across the counter and asked me to sign in. Unit 17. I stood in front of the door for a long moment, the key heavy in my hand. My chest was tight, and my palms were slick with sweat. I didn't want to turn it. I didn't want to know. But I had to. The lock clicked open, and I pulled up the rolling door. Inside, the unit was small and cramped, but what was there stopped me cold. A duffel bag sat on a folding table, along with stacks of documents, a few gift bags, and a framed photo of Kimberly with the man I'd followed, laughing like they'd won the lottery. I unzipped the duffel bag. It was filled with clothes, toiletries, and other essentials. Not just for a weekend trip, this was a go bag. Kimberly was planning to leave, and she hadn't even bothered to tell me. The gift bags were labeled with dates, all in Kimberly's handwriting. First anniversary, Valentine's Day, his birthday. There was even one for Christmas. The contents were cheap, sentimental nonsense, exactly the kind of things I thought she saved for us. But the worst part was the documents. Bank statements. Receipts. A lease agreement for an apartment downtown. All in her name. I sat on the cold concrete floor, staring at the mess in front of me. This wasn't just an affair. She had a whole other life, a life she was ready to walk into the moment she decided to leave ours behind. By the time I locked the unit and left, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely drive. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I went home and waited. Kimberly came in around 6, looking every bit the loving wife who had no idea her world was about to collapse. "Hey," she said, smiling. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said, watching her closely. "Yours?" "Busy," she said, brushing past me. "I'm starving." "What's for dinner?" I didn't answer. My eyes followed her as she moved through the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She didn't notice how still I was, how my gaze lingered just a little too long. When she finally turned back to me, she froze. "What's wrong?" "Unit 17, I said quietly. The color drained from her face. "What?" "Safe space storage. Unit 17. The duffel bag. The bank statements. The photo." I stood, my voice rising with each word. "How long, Kimberly?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like she'd just been hit by a truck. "How long?" I roared, slamming my hand on the counter. "A year," she whispered. "A year. 12 months. 365 days of lying, sneaking around, and pretending everything was fine." "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What the hell did I do to deserve this?" "It's not about you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It was never about you." "Then what was it about?" "I don't know," she cried. "I was unhappy, okay? I felt trapped. And then I met him, and he made me feel alive again." "Alive," I said flatly. "While I was here raising our kids, paying the bills, making a life for us, you needed to feel alive?" Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I was past caring. "You were going to leave," I said, gesturing toward the door. "That's what the bag is for, isn't it? You were going to leave me and the kids for him." "No," she said quickly. "I mean, I thought about it, but I wasn't sure." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "Not anymore." She crumpled into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "But it did," I said coldly. "And now I want to know what happens next." "Stephen," she pleaded, reaching for me. "Please." "Don't," I said, stepping back. "Don't touch me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kimberly didn't say another word, and I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed my keys and left, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process what had just happened. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the image of her sitting in that chair, crying over a man who wasn't me. By the time I returned home, it was nearly midnight. Kimberly was gone. The kids were asleep, and a note sat on the counter. Asterisk, "I'll stay at Michelle's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow." Asterisk. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. All I could do was stare at that note and wonder how my life had come to this. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If Kimberly wanted to destroy our life together, I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I wasn't going to be the fool who sat quietly while she tore everything apart. No, she was going to feel every ounce of pain she'd caused me, and then some. The first thing I did was contact my lawyer, Dave. I'd known him since college. He wasn't just good at his job, he was ruthless. I explained the situation in as much detail as I could manage, laying out the affair, the storage unit, the plans she'd made behind my back. Dave didn't sugarcoat it. "You're in a good position, Stephen. You've got evidence, and the courts don't look kindly on spouses who cheat, especially when there are kids involved. But if you want to make sure she doesn't come out of this on top, you'll need to play it smart." "What do I do?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "First, don't confront her anymore. Let her think she still has the upper hand. Meanwhile, we'll gather more evidence and build a case. Second, secure your finances. If she's planning to leave, she might try to clean out your accounts or make a move on the house. You need to protect what's yours." I hung up feeling a strange sense of control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a plan. That day, I started setting things in motion. I froze our joint accounts, moved my direct deposits to a new bank, and canceled her access to my credit cards. If she wanted to play dirty, so would I. Next, I called in a favor from an old friend who worked in IT. I gave him Kimberly's laptop and phone and asked him to dig up anything he could. Messages, emails, photos, I wanted it all. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "I don't care how small it is. If it shows she's been lying, I need to know about it." It took him 2 days to crack into her devices, and what he found made my blood boil. Kimberly had been seeing the other man, Ryan, his name was, for over a year. They'd met at some marketing conference, and their affair had started almost immediately. The emails and messages were explicit, detailing not just their rendezvous but also their plans for the future. But the worst part? She'd told him things about me. Things that were twisted, exaggerated, or outright lies. She painted me as a neglectful husband, an uninvolved father, a man who had driven her into his arms. That was when I knew revenge wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming my dignity. The next week, I made my move. First, I gathered all the evidence, photos, emails, messages, and compiled them into a neat, damning file. I sent a copy to Dave and kept another for myself. Next, I began unraveling her carefully constructed life. I started with the apartment lease. After confirming it was in her name, I called the landlord. I introduced myself as her husband and explained, very politely, that Kimberly wouldn't be able to honor the lease due to unexpected financial difficulties. When he asked for more details, I hinted at infidelity and legal trouble, enough to make him uncomfortable but not enough to raise suspicion. By the end of the call, he'd agreed to terminate the lease. Then came the duffel bag in the storage unit. I emptied it entirely, replacing the contents with old magazines and junk mail. If Kimberly tried to run, she'd find herself stranded with nothing but trash. I also made sure her car, bought with my money, was unavailable to her. A quick call to the dealership confirmed it was still under my name, so I scheduled a service appointment for the following week. When Kimberly tried to drive it, she'd discover it was locked in the shop. Finally, I sent copies of the evidence to her closest friends and family. Not everyone, just the ones I knew would take my side, her mother, her brother, her boss. I wanted them to see who she really was, to understand why our marriage was falling apart. I saved Ryan for last. I found his work email online and sent him everything, the photos, the messages, the emails. I didn't write a long note, just a single line, *, she's all yours now. Good luck. *. Kimberly came home that night, oblivious to the storm I'd unleashed. She seemed calm, even confident, as if she thought she still had control. "Can we talk?" she asked, setting her purse down. "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. She hesitated, probably thrown off by my composure. "I've been staying with Michelle to give us some space, but I think we need to figure out what's next. For the kids' sake." I laughed. I couldn't help it. For the kids' sake? Now you care about the kids? Her expression hardened. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Stephen. We can be civil about this. Civil? I stood, my voice sharp. You spent a year lying to me, planning to leave me, and now you want civility? I didn't plan to hurt you, she said, tears forming in her eyes. But you did, I said coldly. And now you're going to deal with the consequences. She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. What is this? She whispered, scrolling through her messages. It's the truth, I said. You've spent the last year building a fantasy with Ryan. Now everyone knows what it cost. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. You didn't have to do this. Didn't I? I said. You tore our family apart. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone. You deserve worse than this. Kimberly didn't respond. She grabbed her purse and left, slamming the door behind her. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: Kimberly wasn't going to take anything else from me. Kimberly didn't come home the next night, or the one after that. I assumed she was staying with Ryan or Michelle, but at that point, I didn't care. The kids had questions, of course, but I kept my answers simple. Your mom and I are having problems. We're figuring things out. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. They deserved better than the mess she dragged us into, and I wasn't about to let them bear the brunt of it. By the end of the week, Kimberly finally called. We need to talk, she said, her voice subdued. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a diner on the edge of town. It was quiet, the kind of place where nobody would overhear our conversation. Stephen, she said softly as she slid into the booth across from me. Kimberly, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The waitress came by, but neither of us ordered. Kimberly waited until we were alone again before speaking. I've been staying at Michelle's, she began, her eyes downcast. I didn't think you'd want me at the house. You thought right, I said. She flinched but didn't argue. I guess you've made up your mind, then. I folded my arms. What did you think would happen, Kimberly? That we'd go to therapy and work through this? That I'd forgive you and pretend none of it happened? Her lip quivered, but she held her composure. I don't know what I thought. I didn't want it to end like this. Well, it has. She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know what you've told the kids. Enough, I cut in. They know we're having problems, but I haven't told them the details. That's for us to decide. She looked relieved, and it made me sick. Did she think this was some kind of victory? Stephen, I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt the kids. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. Then why did you do it? She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I don't know. I was unhappy. Lonely. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like we'd lost each other. So, instead of talking to me, you found someone else. She swallowed hard. It wasn't like that at first. Ryan was just someone to talk to. Someone who listened. And then he became someone to sleep with. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away. I don't expect you to understand. Understand? I barked, my voice rising. What's there to understand, Kimberly? You threw away 15 years of marriage, lied to me, and betrayed our family. For what? Some guy who was willing to tell you what you wanted to hear. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. You didn't just cheat on me, Kimberly. You planned to leave me. You had a bag packed, a lease signed, a whole new life waiting. Don't you dare sit here and tell me you didn't mean for this to happen. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. The waitress glanced over, but I waved her off. I don't know how to fix this, Kimberly choked out. I don't know what to do. You can start by being honest, I said coldly. Do you love him? Her head snapped up, her red-rimmed eyes wide. What? You heard me. Do you love him? She shook her head vehemently. No. It wasn't about that. Then what was it about? Attention? Excitement? The thrill of sneaking around behind my back? She winced. I don't know. Maybe all of that. But it didn't mean anything, Stephen. I swear. I laughed bitterly. It meant enough for you to destroy our family. Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. Kimberly stared at the table, her tears dripping onto the worn laminate surface. I want to fix this, she said finally. I want to make things right. You can't, I said firmly. It's too late for that. Please, Stephen, she begged. Think about the kids. They need both of us. They need stability, I countered. They need parents who respect each other. How do you think they'll feel when they find out what you did? Her sobs renewed, but I didn't back down. I've already filed for divorce, I said, sliding a document across the table. You'll get joint custody, but I want the house. I'm not uprooting the kids because of your mistakes. She stared at the paper, her hands trembling. And if I don't agree? Then I'll take this to court, I said coldly. And I'll make sure they know everything. The affair, the lies, the way you abandoned us. Do you really want to put the kids through that? Her shoulders sagged in defeat. No, she whispered. Good, I said, standing. I'll let my lawyer know you'll sign. Stephen, wait, she called as I turned to leave. I stopped but didn't face her. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice barely audible. I'm sure you are, I said without emotion. But sorry doesn't fix this. With that, I walked out, leaving Kimberly and the shattered remains of our marriage behind. In the days that followed, I felt the weight of what had happened settle into every corner of my life. The divorce process had officially started, and while there was a strange relief in knowing I'd taken control, it didn't make the situation any easier. Every interaction with Kimberly was short and to the point, focused only on logistics. I hadn't told the kids the full story yet. Dave had advised me to wait until the dust settled and the paperwork was finalized. But I knew that day was coming, and it loomed over me like a storm I couldn't avoid. The first major change was moving forward with full control of the house. Kimberly had agreed to my terms without much of a fight, and she'd taken an apartment downtown to be closer to her job and, I assumed, Ryan. With her out of the house, I began the process of reclaiming it as mine. I boxed up everything she'd left behind, from clothes to sentimental knickknacks, and left them at the curb. If she wanted them, she could come get them. I didn't need reminders of her everywhere I turned. Her absence didn't go unnoticed by the kids. My 14-year-old was the first to ask. Is Mom coming back? She asked one night while we were eating dinner. I paused, considering my answer. No, sweetie. Mom and I are going to live apart from now on. Why? I put my fork down, meeting her gaze. Sometimes, when two people are married, they realize they can't make each other happy anymore. That's what happened with me and Mom. But we both love you and your brother very much. Her narrowed, suspicious. Did you fight? Is that why she left? No, I lied. It wasn't a fight. Just a decision we made together. She didn't seem convinced, but she dropped the subject. For now. The first formal meeting with Kimberly after our conversation at the diner was at the lawyer's office. She looked different, tired, worn down. It wasn't the confident, composed Kimberly I'd spent years with, and I wasn't sure if that gave me satisfaction or just more sadness. Dave laid out the terms, and she signed without protest. The house was mine, joint custody was agreed upon, and the financial split was straightforward. She wasn't entitled to much, given her infidelity, and I made sure she knew it. Once the papers were signed, Kimberly lingered in the conference room while Dave stepped out. "Stephen," she said, her voice hesitant. I didn't look up. "What is it?" She faltered. "I wish things had been different." "So do I said, standing to leave. "But they aren't. And that's on you." She didn't stop me as I walked out. One Saturday morning, I decided it was time. I sat both kids down in the living room, my heart pounding. "You know your mom and I aren't together anymore. And I want to be honest with you about why." I took a deep breath. "Your mom made some choices that hurt me and our family. She decided to spend time with someone else, a man she met at work, and that's not something I could accept." "I know this is hard to hear," I said, stroking his hair. "But I want you to know that none of this is your fault. Your mom and I love you both very much, and will always be here for you." Kimberly saw the kids on weekends. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger, the betrayal, the pain, it was all still there, but it didn't control me anymore. Kimberly's life, as far as I knew, wasn't going well. She and Ryan had broken up, and she'd struggled to maintain her job after word of the affair spread through her office. But I didn't feel vindicated by her suffering. I'd moved on, in my own way. One night, as I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, watching the sunset, I realized something. I wasn't defined by what Kimberly had done. I wasn't just the guy whose wife cheated. I was Stephen, a father, a friend, a man who'd been through hell and come out the other side. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that was enough.